It was a crisp, sunny morning, and the downtown streets were alive with the hum of the city. Miss Daniels drove through the familiar route to work, the soft melody of her favorite jazz tune filling the car. The day ahead promised the usual challenges of leading one of the city's most respected schools, but for now, she felt calm and grounded. Her peace was abruptly interrupted by flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart sank. Confused, she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. She hadn't been speeding, and as far as she could remember, she had stopped at every sign and light. Officer Johnson stepped out of his cruiser, his heavy boots hitting the pavement with authority. A stocky man in his mid-40s, his face carried an air of impatience. Adjusting his belt, he approached the driver's side window with deliberate slowness. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering with pleasantries. Ms. Daniels nodded politely and retrieved her documents, offering them with a calm smile. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "You ran a stop sign back there," he replied, his tone sharp. She frowned slightly. "I don't believe I did, officer. He cut her off, leaning closer. "Don't argue with me, ma'am. You don't want to make this worse." His words were heavy with implication, his gaze scrutinizing her as if she didn't belong. Ms. Daniels took a deep breath, refusing to let his tone rattle her. "I understand, officer," she said softly, "but I assure you I was careful." Her calm demeanor only seemed to irritate him further. "Careful, huh? What are you even doing in this part of town?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. She straightened in her seat. "I work here," she said simply. Johnson raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. "Oh really? Doing what?" Ms. Daniels met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "I'm the principal of Hamilton Preparatory School." Officer Johnson crossed his arms, his stance radiating skepticism. "Principal of Hamilton Prep," he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "That's a fancy school. You're telling me they hired you to run the place?" Miss Daniels didn't flinch. "Yes, officer," she replied evenly. "I've been the principal there for several years." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Sure you have. Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but lying to a police officer isn't going to help you." Miss Daniels took a calming breath, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. "Officer, I'm not lying. If you'd like, I can provide additional documentation to verify my identity and employment." Her calm response only seemed to frustrate him further. "What I'd like," he snapped, "is for you to stop acting like you're above the rules. Maybe you think your job, whatever it really is, lets you get away with things, but it doesn't work that way." A few pedestrians began slowing down, their curiosity piqued by the raised voices. Ms. Daniels noticed them out of the corner of her eye, but kept her focus on the officer. "Officer, I'm well aware of the rules," she said, her voice steady but firm. "And I know my rights. I've complied fully with your requests and I'm happy to continue cooperating." Johnson's face reddened as he realized the attention their interaction was drawing. His voice grew louder, as if to reassert control. "You're setting a terrible example," he declared. "Driving recklessly, arguing with law enforcement. This is the kind of behavior you think is okay to show kids?" Ms. Daniels sat tall in her seat, her composure unshaken. "The example I aim to set," she said with quiet strength, "is one of integrity, even in difficult situations." Her words hung in the air, silencing the growing murmurs of the crowd. Johnson faltered, momentarily caught off guard by her grace under pressure. But he wasn't ready to back down, not yet. Officer Johnson's radio crackled, breaking the tense silence. A dispatcher's voice cut through, urgent and clear. "All units, respond to Hamilton Preparatory School. Incident involving a student altercation. Immediate assistance required." The officer frowned, glancing at Ms. Daniels. "You got lucky," he muttered, shoving her documents back into her hands. "Just watch yourself." Ms. Daniels took her papers calmly, her expression neutral. "Have a good day, officer," she said, her tones steady. She put the car in gear and pulled away, her focus already shifting to the work waiting for her at the school. Unbeknownst to her, Officer Johnson followed the same route, arriving at Hamilton Prep shortly after she did. He entered the school office, where his daughter Emily sat hunched over, her eyes red from crying. "What happened?" Johnson demanded, his protective instincts kicking in. The school secretary glanced at him apologetically. "Emily was involved in a bullying incident," she explained. The principal will be here shortly to address the matter." Johnson nodded stiffly, his frustration evident. He paced the small office, trying to calm his nerves. Moments later, the door opened, and Miss Daniels walked in. Her professional demeanor radiating authority, she greeted the secretary with a warm smile before turning to the small gathering in the room. "I understand there's been an issue," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. Johnson's jaw dropped, as recognition dawned on him. "You," he stammered, his face flushing with embarrassment. Ms. Daniels met his stunned gaze with a composed smile. "Good afternoon, Officer Johnson," she said, her tone as polite as it had been during their earlier encounter. "Let's address this situation with Emily, shall we?" The air in the room shifted as the power dynamic reversed, leaving Johnson grappling with the weight of his earlier actions. Ms. Daniels sat across from Emily and her father in the small office, exuding calm professionalism. She addressed the situation with clarity and compassion, ensuring Emily felt heard and supported. "Bullying is serious," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "Our goal is to create a safe environment where every student feels valued. Emily, can you tell me what happened?" Emily hesitated, glancing nervously at her father before explaining the incident in halting sentences. Miss Daniels listened attentively, nodding occasionally. She reassured Emily that steps would be taken to address the issue and prevent it from happening again. Throughout the conversation, Officer Johnson remained uncharacteristically silent, his earlier bravado completely gone. As Miss Daniels concluded her remarks, he cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Miss Daniels, I owe you an apology," he began, unable to meet her eyes. She looked at him with measured calm, waiting for him to continue. "I was wrong earlier," he admitted, his face flushing with shame. "I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I treated you unfairly. You've shown more grace and professionalism in this situation than I deserved." Daniels studied him for a moment before responding, her tone steady but kind. "Thank you, Officer Johnson. I appreciate your apology," she said. "But let this be a reminder that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their background or how they appear to you." Her words were firm, but not harsh, and they landed with the weight of truth. Johnson nodded, his expression one of genuine remorse. "I'll do better," he said quietly, his voice tinged with sincerity. Ms. Daniels offered him a small, encouraging smile. "That's all anyone can ask," she replied. Then, turning her attention back to Emily, she added, "Let's work together to make sure every student feels supported." The tension eased, replaced by a sense of understanding and the possibility of change. As Officer Johnson walked back to his patrol car, Emily holding his hand, his mind swirled with conflicting emotions. The events of the morning had shattered the comfortable narrative he'd lived by for years. He thought of Miss Daniels, how composed and dignified she'd been despite his unjust treatment. Sitting in his car, he stared at the steering wheel, replaying her words in his mind. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of their background. He'd prided himself on being a fair officer, someone who upheld the law without bias. Yet today he'd allowed his prejudices to guide his actions. It wasn't just about what he'd said, it was about the assumptions he'd made the moment he'd seen her face. Johnson sighed, realizing he owed more than an apology. He owed it to himself, to his daughter, and to people like Ms. Daniels to do better. This wasn't just about one incident, it was about unlearning years of ingrained behavior and striving to see people for who they truly were. Meanwhile, Ms. Daniels returned to her office, her steps measured and steady. She closed the door behind her and took a deep breath, letting the tension of the morning fade. Her desk was cluttered with paperwork, but she didn't mind. The work she did every day was a reminder of her purpose and the change she was making in young lives. The encounter with Officer Johnson had tested her resolve, but it also reaffirmed her strength. She had stood firm in her values, proving once again that dignity and perseverance could triumph over prejudice. As she settled into her chair, Ms. Daniels glanced out the window at the bustling schoolyard. The children laughed and played, a living testament to hope and potential. She smiled, her heart light with the knowledge that no matter the challenges, her work would always matter. Thank you so much for watching this story. It means the world to us. If you enjoyed it and felt inspired, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to join our community. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what resonated with you, or if you've ever experienced something similar. And don't stop there. Show some love by hitting the like button and sharing this video with your friends and family. Together, we can spread powerful messages and spark important conversations. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.